Your repeated job losses are directly tied to your infidelity. I've conducted my own investigation since you left. Her words hit like a sledgehammer, leaving both Michael and Angela visibly stunned. Cynthia's calm but devastating tone underscored the depth of her resolve. Cynthia's words painted a damning picture, her tone unwavering as she listed the names of Angela's colleagues, women Michael had been involved with during his supposed innocent time in Hartford. Angela sat in stunned silence, her face pale and her expression unreadable. Cynthia, unbothered by the lack of response, let out a sharp laugh. "I don't expect you to answer," she said curtly, turning her attention back to Michael. "You are no longer welcome in my home. Provide me with your current address so I can have your belongings sent there." As the screen went black, Michael's rage boiled over. He muttered a threat under his breath, his fists clenched and his body tense with anger. The surge of adrenaline that rushed through me was instant and electric. Without a second thought, I stood, retrieved my Colt .45, and aimed it squarely at him. The sight of the gun drained the color from Michael's face. He staggered slightly, his bravado crumbling in an instant. I didn't flinch. My voice was calm, deliberate, and firm. "Here's how this works," I said, keeping my gaze locked on him. "You have a choice. Leave quietly or stay silent. Either way, you keep your mouth shut. That's the only acceptable response." Thankfully, he chose wisely, sinking back into the couch without a word. Turning my attention away from him, I caught sight of Angela. Her tear-streaked face was a mess of anguish, and the sheer depth of her misery stirred something in me. A mixture of empathy and unshakable resolve. For all her faults, seeing her like this was gut-wrenching. She hesitated, then finally broke the silence. "I've been seeing a counselor," she admitted through a shaky voice, her tears threatening to overflow again. "For the past 2 weeks. Her confession prompted a groan and another wave of tears. "It's ironic, isn't it?" she said bitterly. "I'm the one who betrayed you, yet I'm the one seeking mental health support." Her words hung in the air, and I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah," I said, shaking my head at the absurdity. "That about sums it up." Later, as we sat in silence, I recounted a question Dr. Waters, my counselor, had asked me during one of our sessions. "Do you understand the saying, 'love is blind'?" she had asked. The question had struck a chord with me, forcing me to reflect on my own blindness. "I loved you so deeply, Angie," I said quietly. "So much that I ignored your flaws, even when they were right in front of me. I even ignored your infidelity. That's what my love for you did." I paused, then added, "And despite everything, I don't think you'll ever find someone who loves you the way I did." Angela's lip quivered as she listened, her face still flushed with emotion. "I'm going to keep seeing Dr. Waters," she said softly. "I need someone I can trust, someone to confide in after all of this." Her voice cracked as she continued, "Chris, I can't even describe how much humiliation and disrespect I've endured from someone I loved deeply. It's unbearable, but I have to move on. I have to find a way to heal." Her determination was clear, but so was her pain. She went on to mention a conversation with Dr. Waters earlier in the day. "She wasn't thrilled about my idea of revenge," Angela admitted, "but she approved the first 3 Zoom meetings, said it might be therapeutic closure in a way." Her tone shifted slightly, more hesitant now, but she strongly advised against the next one. She said it could set back my recovery, might hurt me more than it helps. I leaned back in my chair, considering her words for a moment. "Dr. Waters is probably right," I acknowledged. "This next meeting is likely to hurt both of us." Angela looked up, hope flickering briefly in her tear-filled eyes. But I shook my head. "The difference is, I don't care," I said bluntly. "This meeting isn't about healing. It's about truth. And it's happening." I picked up the remote for the 4th time and waved it in her direction. Angela shrank back into the couch, panic flashing across her face. Her voice caught in her throat as I turned the remote toward the TV, my finger hovering over the button. Without hesitation, I pressed it. I pressed the button, and all eyes locked onto the screen. As the image came into focus, Angela gasped, murmuring in anguish. The face on the screen belonged to Kelly, our daughter. "Hi, Dad," Kelly began, her voice calm but resolute. "I just want you to know how much I love you." My chest tightened, and I responded immediately, "I love you too, sweetheart." Angela cried out, her voice cracking with desperation. "How can you do this to me, Chris? How can you treat me so cruelly?" Kelly didn't let her finish. "Stop, Mom," she said sharply, her expression hardening. "I overheard your conversations. I know everything, your plans, your actions. It's disgusting, grotesque even. I can't believe what you've done." Angela flinched at Kelly's words but quickly tried to justify herself. "I was lonely," she pleaded. "I missed you so much after you moved away." Kelly's expression softened slightly, but only for a moment. "Are you blaming me for this, Mom?" she asked, her tone incredulous. "No, of course not," Angela replied quickly, shaking her head. "That's not what I meant." Despite Angela's attempt to explain, Kelly remained firm. "Then don't use me as an excuse for your selfish, self-absorbed behavior," she snapped. "You've hurt Dad, and you've hurt me too." Angela's tears began to flow freely. "Please, Kelly, come to Boston," she begged. "Let's talk this out." Kelly shook her head. "You're not coming to Boston, Mom. Not now, not for this. Besides, you've got your boyfriend and your celebration plans near Cape Cod. Don't you?" Angela's face fell as Kelly delivered the next blow. "By the way, I'm pregnant," she said, her voice softening as a small smile broke through her otherwise serious expression. "And I'm celebrating this with the people who bring love and joy into my life, not with the negativity that has consumed yours." Angela, in a last-ditch effort, attempted to assert her maternal authority. "I'm your mother, Kelly. I demand an invitation." But Kelly wasn't having it. "No, Mom," she said firmly. "This is my choice, and I won't let you ruin it." For the fourth time, the screen went dark, leaving Angela visibly shaken. She sat in silence, tears streaming down her face. I stood up slowly, adjusting my posture as I discreetly slipped my pistol into the waistband at the back of my pants. "I'm going out for dinner," I announced, my voice steady. "I'll be back in about 2 hours. Turning to Angela, I added, "While I'm gone, I want you to pack your belongings, just the essentials. You won't be allowed back into this house until the court responds to the divorce petition. That should take about a week." Finally, I turned to Michael, my tone shifting to something darker. "You've got 3 days to leave the state," I said, my words deliberate and unyielding. "If you're still here on Monday, there will be consequences. Severe ones. Don't test me." As I pulled the front door open, I glanced back at the 2 defeated figures behind me. "It's supposed to be a beautiful weekend in New York," I remarked, letting the words linger before stepping out into the cool evening air. "My name is Jim Reynolds. I'm 56 years old, standing at 5 feet 8 inches and still in decent shape for my age. I've been married to Kelly for 22 years, and she's the love of my life. My soul mate. Really. Kelly is 45, with striking blonde hair, blue eyes, and a petite frame at 5 feet 2 inches. She's built for love and affection, and I've cherished every intimate moment we've shared, even though there were times she didn't always reciprocate the sentiment. Before settling into civilian life, I spent 8 years in the Special Forces straight out of high school, specializing in explosives. That experience set the stage for my next chapter. 6 years in engineering school, where I sharpened my skills. Eventually, I founded my own company, and now, I own a multi-million-dollar construction business, but not many people know about my military service. That chapter of my life is something I've kept quiet, largely because of the demons I faced afterward, which required 4 years of counseling to overcome. My pilot's license actually predates my time in the military, but Kelly has never trusted me enough to join me for a flight, no matter how much I tried to reassure her. From the moment I met Kelly, I was captivated. We were married 2 years later. She came from old money. Her maiden name, Moore, tied her lineage to Richard Moore of the Mayflower. Her family, however, made no secret of their disdain for me. In their eyes, I was little more than a servant. Despite this, I went all out to make her happy. I bought her a large house in Cambridge, Massachusetts, complete with a 4-car garage and a BMW to call her own. We have 2 children, or rather, she has 2 children. John, 21, and his younger sibling, 19, are both in college. For them, I spared no expense, buying each a brand new BMW. Meanwhile, I drive a 10-year-old GMC 4-wheel drive pickup. About 6 years ago, their behavior toward me shifted dramatically. They began treating me with contempt, openly ignoring me, and refusing to acknowledge my authority. They'd only listen to Kelly, their mother. At the time, I couldn't understand the reason behind their disdain, but the truth was far more devastating than I could have imagined. 8 years ago, I hired John, someone I thought was my best friend, to work with me. The kids seemed to adore him, and for a while I chalked it up to his charismatic personality. But about a year ago, Kelly made a critical mistake. She left her email open on her laptop. My curiosity got the better of me, and what I found shattered my world. In her emails, Kelly confessed to despising me since the day we met, a sentiment shared by her entire family. But that wasn't the worst of it. As I dug deeper, I uncovered a horrifying truth. The kids I thought were mine weren't. They were John's. The betrayal ran deep. Not only had Kelly been unfaithful to me for years, but the children had known the truth for about 6 years, laughing behind my back. And John, my so-called best friend, had known Kelly long before I ever hired him. To make matters worse, they found my ignorance amusing, mocking me together. When I married Kelly, her father insisted on a prenuptial agreement, which I signed without hesitation. The agreement is set to expire in 2.5 years, after 25 years of marriage. It contains a strict infidelity clause, stipulating that if either party cheats, they leave with nothing. Desperate for answers and clarity, I reached out to an old friend from my military days, Kevin. He introduced me to Paul, a surveillance expert, who helped me set up a comprehensive monitoring system. Now, Kelly's emails are forwarded to a private account I control, along with copies of the kids' emails. Every room in the house is wired to pick up their phone calls, and I have access to video recordings. With Kevin's guidance, I was able to uncover their secrets without losing my composure or my freedom. At one point, I was tempted to resort to violence. The betrayal and humiliation were almost too much to bear. But Kevin talked me down, convincing me that there were better ways to exact my revenge. Ways that would hurt them emotionally, financially, and socially. He suggested I take their money, tarnish their family name, and expose their disgrace to the world. Meanwhile, John and his friends continued to mock me openly, confident that they'd outmaneuver me. They were fully aware of the prenup and the infidelity clause, eagerly anticipating the day Tom, another friend of theirs, would step in to take over my role. What they didn't know was that I'd uncovered another layer of their deception. I possess video evidence of my father-in-law discussing a scheme to create the illusion that he had funded my company, all to bolster his family's image. Their ultimate plan was to have John take over my business, a plot they had been crafting for years. The pieces finally fell into place, and the betrayal made sense. Their strategy to insert John into my life began with him applying for a position at my company, all under the guise of being my closest ally. It was a carefully orchestrated move, and for a long time I bought into it. But now, the only people I genuinely trust are my old military buddies, and I'm immensely grateful to have kept those connections alive. One of those connections, Paul, has been invaluable. As a computer consultant for my company, he's not only secured my network but also helped me identify who among my employees are allies and who are enemies. With his expertise, I gained about 1.5 years to prepare for the inevitable divorce, time I used to meticulously plan my next steps. During this period, I assumed a calculated role in my strained marriage. I refrained from expressing love or engaging in physical closeness, except when it was necessary to maintain appearances. However, reflecting on how she mistreated me, I decided to intensify these interactions at times, not out of affection, but to inflict subtle emotional distress. I only allowed these encounters when I was certain she hadn't recently been with John, often sending him out of town for business trips to keep him out of the picture without her catching on. Although I was fully aware of her indiscretions, I feigned ignorance, maintaining the facade that John was still my closest friend. Behind the scenes, I worked to humiliate her. I orchestrated public encounters to undermine her and discreetly conducted DNA tests on the children. The results confirmed what I already knew. Neither child was biologically mine. They were John's. Their elaborate plan, it seemed, hinged on John taking over my company after the divorce, a final move intended to exploit and disgrace me. Anticipating this, I made a bold decision. I quietly met with a trusted competitor, someone I respected despite our past rivalry, and offered to sell my company at a reduced price. I laid out my reasons for the sale and ensured complete confidentiality among a select few, including our lawyers. My choice of law firm was no accident. They shared my disdain for my father-in-law, which played a significant role in my decision to hire them. Their advice proved invaluable. They guided me in setting up a private bank account and a separate phone line, ensuring my financial independence. They also suggested convincing Kelly and the kids to lease their cars instead of buying new ones. It was an idea that everyone embraced, as it allowed for annual upgrades at a lower cost while quietly benefiting me. Meanwhile, I began packing my belongings and moving them into a rented storage unit. It was a quiet, methodical process, unnoticed by those around me. People still laughed at me, sometimes openly, sometimes behind my back, but I let it slide. Every laugh only strengthened my resolve. As part of the plan, I suggested to Kelly that we start filing our taxes separately. I framed it as a way to optimize our finances and proposed transferring the house solely into her name for tax purposes. The idea required us to take out a new mortgage solely in her name, a concept her family enthusiastically supported. It aligned perfectly with their vision of Kelly claiming the house in the divorce. Unbeknownst to them, this move was carefully calculated. My law firm had advised it to protect my credit, ensuring that any financial liabilities tied to the house wouldn't come back to haunt me. When Kelly expressed a desire for home improvements, like adding an in-ground pool, I encouraged her to go for it, as long as it was funded through a second mortgage in her name. Half of the funds went toward the renovations she wanted, while the other half, quietly and without raising suspicion, I funneled a portion of the funds from the second mortgage into my private account. With Kelly none the wiser, I continued managing all the household bills while making subtle but significant changes to my own affairs. For instance, I altered my life insurance policies, redirecting the beneficiaries to various charities in the event of my death. I also sold my company, keeping the sale as low profile as possible. The agreement ensured that all employees were retained, except for John and his associates. Within a year, I had everything ready for my exit. To maintain appearances, I proposed an elaborate gesture. A 2-week trip to Europe for the entire family, including the in-laws and my ex-best friend, John. I'm sure they mocked me behind my back, but it didn't matter. The trip served my purpose perfectly, especially since Kelly was the one footing the bill. Behind the scenes, I had purchased 150 acres of remote land in Alaska, accessible only by plane. My concealed pilot's license was finally coming into play. Plans were drawn up for an off-grid cabin elevated on stilts, complete with a plane shelter. I hired a company to build it, aiming for the property to be move-in ready by the time I was prepared to leave. Recognizing the project's longer timeline, I also bought a house in Fairbanks, simple but functional, with a spacious, barn-like garage for storage. It would serve as my base of operations and a place to keep a motorhome for when I wanted to travel. To keep my plans airtight, I enlisted the help of a military friend who shared my disdain for my in-laws. He agreed, albeit reluctantly, to register a new motorhome in his name. Despite his protests, I insisted on compensating him and my other trusted friends for their assistance, all using funds discreetly siphoned from Kelly's finances. Through her emails, it was clear that Kelly and her family still believed I was blissfully unaware of their schemes. Little did they know I had stopped paying the bills for the house, the cars, the insurance, and the utilities, all of which were now in Kelly's name. As a result, her credit, not mine, would take the hit. To solidify the illusion that I was still managing everything, I established a P.O. box in her name and redirected all bills there. When the divorce was finalized, the damage to her credit would be catastrophic. And thanks to my supposed unemployment, there would be no alimony payments either. The sale of my company was another layer of my plan. Officially, it appeared that I had lost the business to new owners. In reality, every penny from the sale was safely tucked away in an offshore account, out of their reach. My exit strategy was nearly complete. I informed Kelly and the family that I'd be unable to join them in Europe right away due to a company emergency. Their lack of concern, and even their apparent relief at my absence, didn't escape my notice. It only confirmed what I'd long suspected. They couldn't care less about me. The night before their departure, I made sure Kelly would remember me. For the first and final time, I pushed boundaries during our intimate encounter. Initially, she seemed pleased, but by the time it was over, she was sore and furious. I didn't care. My intention wasn't affection. It was to leave a lasting impression. Once they were on their way to Europe, I returned to the house and left it wide open. Paul, ever reliable, came by to retrieve the surveillance equipment, ensuring there was no trace of my monitoring efforts. I paid a moving company in cash to transport my belongings to Alaska, taking with me only the essentials: clothing, tools, fishing gear, and the weapons I'd carefully stored from my military days. Upon leaving, I left all the furniture behind, ensuring no trace of my destination was left behind in any paperwork. Nothing that mentioned Alaska. My son Mike, who had never shown an interest in hunting or fishing with me, remained blissfully unaware of my usual trip destinations. This worked to my advantage. To maintain the illusion, I kept my old phone account active so Kelly wouldn't suspect anything. I planned to shut it down about a month after my departure. Before leaving, I handed my phone to a trusted colleague with strict instructions. "Don't answer any calls from my wife," I told him, "but feel free to use it for making calls if needed." With that settled, I made one final visit to my in-laws' house. Using my keys, I let myself in, turned on all the lights, and logged into Mike's laptop. On a college website, I posted an invitation to a week-long keg party at their house. I knew the chaos that would follow would be unavoidable and richly deserved. My in-laws, being notoriously frugal and favoring John, made the next steps easier. I closed all bank accounts and canceled every credit card associated with both Kelly and myself, wiping out a total of $50,000. I sold my truck to a local car dealer, pocketing the cash. After a few days of preparation, I departed for Alaska, never disclosing my destination to anyone. As I made my way across the country, I kept an eye on events through Kelly's emails. Unsurprisingly, neither she, the kids, my in-laws, nor my so-called best friend John made any effort to reach out or inquire about my whereabouts. They all seemed to assume I would take care of everything, blissfully unaware that Kelly was now footing the bill for their entire lifestyle. The journey was freeing. I took my time, enjoying the sights across the country while relying solely on cash for expenses. Once I reached Bellingham, Washington, I boarded a ferry to Valdez, Alaska. From there, I continued driving to Fairbanks, all without needing a passport. By the time I reached Washington, Kelly and her family had returned from their European vacation, only to find their homes and properties completely trashed. It was exactly as I'd anticipated. They were oblivious to my absence during their trip and seemed more concerned about the state of their houses than the fact that I was gone. Ironically, it wasn't my family who started looking for me. It was the police, who began inquiring about my whereabouts the Sunday after their return to the United States. Before leaving, I had granted my attorney written power of attorney to handle my divorce proceedings. I informed the firm that I would check in 2 weeks later but refused to disclose my location. On Monday morning, Kelly was served with infidelity divorce papers. I had wanted to sue John for alienation of affection, but Massachusetts law prohibited it due to numerous past lawsuits involving state politicians. Even without that option, the fallout for John and his associates was swift. As per my agreement with the new company owners, all of them were let go. With all of my belongings already gone, Kelly was left in a dire financial situation. Her bank accounts were drained, creditors were circling, and her cars were repossessed. The power and water to the house were cut off and property taxes, along with both mortgages, were severely overdue. With no other options, Kelly and her spoiled kids were forced to move into her parents' hotel. Their once pristine home was now a wreck, and her parents had no choice but to intervene too. Kelly's family had to rent cars for everyone after their luxurious BMWs were repossessed. A humbling transition that left them driving far less impressive vehicles. Even John, now living with Kelly's parents, had to plead with them for a rental car. Their fall from grace was swift and undeniable. Kelly and her family didn't take it lying down. They hired private investigators to track me down, while her attorneys attempted to stall the divorce proceedings, a futile effort. As the case progressed, it began attracting public attention, fueled by leaked DNA test results and explicit videos that left no room for doubt. Audio recordings further exposed the depth of their betrayal, revealing not only the duration of the affair, but also the family's active involvement in plotting to ruin me. Their plans to publicly humiliate me, seize my company, and mock my middle-class roots were laid bare for the world to see. Worse still, additional videos and audio clips surfaced, showing members of Kelly's family bribing politicians and public officials, as well as mistreating honest individuals. These revelations were disseminated widely across various websites, turning the divorce case into a public spectacle. The fallout even reached the courtroom. The judge originally assigned to the case was forced to recuse himself after being exposed as one of the bribed officials. Despite the chaos, I reached out to my kids, hoping to salvage some connection. They ignored me completely. 5 years later, during a trip to Boston to tie up some loose ends, I found myself at a restaurant frequented by Kelly's family. It was purely coincidental, but when they walked past my table, they didn't recognize me. My long gray hair, full beard, and a healthier physique had made me nearly unrecognizable. Curiosity got the better of me. I asked the waiter to send a bottle of champagne to their table. When they received it, I watched as their eyes scanned the room, trying to figure out who had sent it. They looked tired, worn, like they had aged 20 years since I last saw them. After a few minutes, Kelly's gaze landed on me. Her eyes widened in shock as she shouted, "Oh my God! You son of a—" She stood abruptly, pointing at me as she revealed my identity to the rest of the family. John, still as hot-headed as ever, attempted to confront me. I didn't wait for his dramatics. With one well-placed punch, I knocked him out cold. His son decided to try his luck next, but I subdued him with ease, not needing to exert much effort. Kelly, now frantic, ran up to me, screaming insults and berating me for ruining her family. Her words were venomous, but they carried no weight with me. I had heard it all before. The chaos didn't last long. The police arrived within minutes, breaking up the scene. They arrested me, of course, but I calmly instructed the waiter to contact my lawyer, knowing the police were unlikely to grant me the courtesy. Once my attorney arrived, the police reviewed the restaurant's surveillance tapes, which clearly showed the entire interaction. The footage captured me sending the champagne, speaking calmly, and only defending myself when John and his son became aggressive. My lawyer emphasized my self-defense stance, and the evidence supported it. Thanks to my lawyer's foresight in preparing for incidents like this and securing copies of the surveillance tapes, the police released me without further issue. I had no doubt that, without those preparations, I might have been in serious trouble, especially given the police's long-standing ties to my father-in-law. Later that evening, I received an unexpected call. Kelly phoned my hotel room, requesting a meeting. I agreed, but only on my terms. We met in the hotel lobby, ensuring our conversation was recorded. I wanted a clear record of anything she said, knowing her tendency to twist facts. Kelly wasted no time. Her voice was a mix of frustration and curiosity as she asked, "Why did you do this to me? To us?" I stared at her, incredulous, before calmly replying, "Because I discovered your plot against me," I said, my tone even. "I simply acted before you could." Her face twitched with a mix of guilt and indignation, but I continued, "I've known about your affair with John for a long time. What I can't understand, I said, meeting her gaze, is why you married me if you hated me so much. She flinched but tried to compose herself. It wasn't personal, she muttered, brushing the question aside. I didn't mention the wired house or the years of surveillance through her emails. Let her think I'd pieced it together some other way. I pressed further. You lost the house, the cars. Mike lost his house and truck. You're all living with your parents now. And you're saying it's nothing personal? Her initial defensiveness gave way to a bitter laugh. At first, it was just about escaping my family, she admitted. But eventually, I started to enjoy it. Manipulating you, enjoying the situation with John. It was fun. I shook my head, disgusted but unwilling to show it. Why didn't you just divorce me when you met John? I asked, my voice quieter now. She smirked, her response dripping with irony. Because it was enjoyable at first, she said. And I thought I'd get everything in the end. I didn't respond. Her words confirmed everything I'd suspected, but hearing them aloud was still jarring. Without another word, I stood and returned to my hotel room, leaving her in the lobby to wrestle with her thoughts. The next morning, I left Boston and made my way back to Alaska, eager to reclaim the peace I'd built for myself. They were left to grapple with the financial ruin, humiliation, and shattered reputations I'd caused. It was far more satisfying than resorting to violence. Now they'll live every day with the constant reminder of me, my absence, my actions, and the life they destroyed for themselves.